doing 4, 6. We have already learned how to graph sine and cosine. Now we're graphing the other 4 remaining functions, okay? The 4 remaining functions are going to be tangent, cotangent, cosecant, and secant. The ones we're focusing on right now for first is going to be cosecant and secant. Here's what I need your brain to understand. Secant and cosecant are reciprocal functions of sine and cosine. So since they are reciprocal functions of sine and cosine, that means I have to graph sine and cosine first in order to graph the secant and the cosecant respectively. Do we all understand that? Okay? What I need your brain to understand is that every level that we have in our sine and cosine graphs will turn into asymptotes in our cosecant-secant graphs. One more time. Every level in our sine and cosine graphs will turn into asymptotes in our cosecant and secant graphs. In addition to that, our maxes and our mins will be reflected over that max and min point, turning into either the opposite, if it's a max, a min, if it's a min, a max. Do we all understand that? Now, with that being said, everything that you see here is exactly the same. The period is still 2 pi on both of them. They still start from 0 to 2 pi and still start from 0 to 2 pi, so you're still going to take your starting point equal to 0, and you're still going to take your ending point equal to 2 pi. Nothing has changed. Why? Because that's everything we learned with sine and cosine, yes? Now, the pattern is what is going to be different. Our levels are asymptotes. For cosecant, you will have 3 levels. Those 3 levels from sine will turn into asymptotes for our cosecant. And then you are going to reflect the max and the min. Over here, for cosine, there are only 2 levels with cosine, so for our secant graph, there will be only 2 asymptotes. And then you have half of an arm of a parabola and half of an arm of a parabola on the other side, and then you are going to simply reflect the middle. So let's go ahead and start one. The one I'm going to start is going to be this one right here. Y equals -2 secant 4x plus 2. Now, the biggest thing I need your brain to understand is as soon as you see the word secant in this graph, your brain should say immediately, I can't graph secant without graphing cosine. So we're going to go ahead and say that this is going to be y is equal to -2 times the cosine of 4x plus 2. And that's what we are going to graph first. So if I'm graphing that first, we are going to go through this exactly the way we did yesterday and the day before's assignment. So what's the very first thing we should find? Amplitude. And what is my amplitude here? Absolute value of 2, which is going to be -2, which is? 2 is your amplitude. Now, since my amplitude in the original problem is negative, what does that imply? It would imply that my pattern is going to be reflected or flipped. So typically, cosine looks like motorcycle handlebars. So what it's going to look like now, instead of having the maximum, I'm going to have a minimum, a level, a maximum, a level, and then a minimum again. Do we all understand how the pattern is now flipped? Next, I need to find my period. My period is going to be 2 pi divided by the absolute value of b. So that's going to be 2 pi divided by 4, which is going to be pi over 2. Now, if my period is pi over 2, tell me about my heart rate. Am I resting or am I exercising? What is pi over 2 in comparison to the normal period of 2 pi? It is smaller, which means I am faster, and I'm going to complete one cycle or one revolution around the unit circle much faster than what I typically would, so this is going to be shrunk down. Yes? Okay? Now, next, I need to find my interval. My interval is used to go from one x value to the next x value to land on my quadrant angles. So my period is going to be pi over 2. So when you divide by 4, you're multiplying by a fourth to give you pi over 8. So I found my interval. What would I go and find next? Your level. So let's go ahead and find our level. Level is going to be 0 plus or minus c. What is c in this problem? C is 2, so we're going to have 0 plus 2, which gives you 2 as your level. So now that I found my level, what do I find next? Your maximum. That's going to be your level plus your amplitude. So my level is 2, and then my amplitude is 2 to give me 4 as my maximum. Yes? Next, I need to find my minimum. So my minimum is going to be my level minus my amplitude, so that's going to be 2 minus 2, which is going to give me 0 as my minimum. Do we all understand everything that I've done so far? Wonderful. Okay, now, the next thing we need to find is our starting point and our ending point. Now, what we talked about yesterday was a horizontal phase shift, moving it right and left. Okay? And I told you, if you have a set of parentheses, then you will have a phase shift. In this problem, I have 4 times x. Is there a d in this problem? Am I adding or subtracting anything inside the parentheses to the 4x? No, so there's not going to be a phase shift, but let's say you forgot that. My starting point is going to be 4x is equal to 0. My ending point is going to be 4x is equal to 2 pi. So x is equal to 0, and then x is equal to pi over 2. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we are going to make an XY table. So, if I'm making my XY table, I said that we were starting at 0, and what is the interval that we're adding every time? Pi over 8. So since we're starting at 0, it's kind of easy to add our fractions in our head here. So 1/8 plus 1/8 is 2/8. What does 2/8 reduce down to? Pi over 4. So that was 2/8 plus another 8. This gives me 3/8. Plus an 8 gives me 4/8, which is going to be simply pi over 2. Okay, so those are our x values. Now, I'm going to add several different columns here. And the first one I'm going to put in here is going to be -2 times the cosine of 4x plus 2. Then we have our pattern. Then we have our y value. And then we're going to have our secant. So we have a couple things that I need your brain to be thinking about here and understanding. Okay? We can fill out our pattern column because we know that we're supposed to have a minimum here, a level, a maximum, a level, and a minimum again. Yes? And now we're going to fill in the middle by doing that calculation. So that's -2 times the cosine of 4x plus 2. And if you recall, your brain needs to remember this right here. This is going to be 0, which is the same thing as 2 pi, which is 1, 0. This is going to be pi over 2, which corresponds to 0, 1. This is going to be pi, which corresponds to -1, 0. And this is going to be 3 pi over 2, which corresponds to 0, -1. Then we have the negative angles. So this is negative pi over 2. This is negative pi. This is -3 pi over 2. And then this is -2 pi. So all of that is still in your brain that you need to remember, yes? All of that is right up here that you've memorized, okay? So then whenever I go ahead and say, well, what is the cosine when x is equal to 0? Well, that's 4 times 0 there. So that's going to give me 0. So what is the cosine at 0 degrees? Or 0 radians? It is going to be 1. So that means this is going to be -2 times that 1, which is going to be -2 plus 2, which gives me 0 as my minimum. Now my question is 0 my minimum? Yes, it is. So that means I've checked it and I know that I'm right. Does that make sense? So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plug in the next one. So this is -2 times the cosine of 4 times pi over 8 plus 2. Now remember, the whole point of using these x values, pi over 8, pi over 4, 3 pi over 8, is because when I plug them in and multiply them by 4, I am going to land on these quadrant angles right here. Yes? Those quadrant angles are super important. That's what gives me the values that are my max level and my min. So this right here does give me a pi over 2. And what is the cosine at pi over 2? It is 0. So I have 2 times 0, which is 0, plus 2, which gives me a 2. Is that my level? Yes, it is, so that I know I'm right. I've checked this, which means I don't have to do any more plug and chug and calculation work. I can simply fill in my pattern. So my maximum is 4, my level is back to 2, and my minimum is back to 0. So now we're going to graph this. I'm going to give it another page here, and I'm going to graph this. Okay, now I'm going to graph my cosine graph first. So if I graph my cosine graph, I'm going to be down here at 0 and at 0. This is going to be at 2. This is going to be at 4. This comes back down to 2. And then this comes back down to 0. Okay, so the red is equal to y times negative 2 cosine of 4x plus 2. The red is that graph. Now, in order for me to graph this secant, here's what I need you to do. Everybody watch very closely up here. You ready? My levels are going to turn to asymptotes. And on here, I'm simply going to draw a dotted line. And I'm actually... There's my levels. They turn into dotted lines. You with me? Then, I'm simply going to reflect this. This point right here was a minimum, and it's one side of the arm. Now I'm going to go the opposite way, and I'm going to go down with it. And I'm going to have one side of a parabola. In the middle of this maximum, on the red graph, I'm going to make that a minimum of this parabola and reflect the red up. Down here, I'm going to have a pi over 2, a point, and I'm going to reflect that down and having one arm of the parabola, which now means my green is negative 2 times the secant of 4x plus 2, which is what I want you to graph. On tonight's homework, I should see 2 graphs for every cosecant and secant. Go ahead and use pencil to graph your sine or cosine function, and then swap with your pen and draw your secant or cosecant graphs. Make sense? Any questions over what I just said? Now, how do I finish the secant? You are going to just simply bring over the other numbers. Okay? You're going to bring over the other numbers. That is how you graph secant and cosecant. Any questions? Okay, let's go ahead and now talk about tangent and cotangent. Tangent and cotangent are different. Okay? They are different. How are they different? Well, instead of having a period of 2 pi, tangent and cotangent have a period of pi. That changes many things for you. The periods are exactly the same. However, the starting point and ending point for tangent is going to start at negative pi over 2, and it's going to end at positive pi over 2. Over on cotangent, it starts at 0 and ends at pi. So my starting point is equal to 0, and my ending point would be equal to pi. Do we all understand that? They still have the same distance. They're still pi units for your period. However, they start differently. The next thing your brain needs to understand is that they actually look like an x cubed function. Tangent looks like x cubed, and cotangent looks like negative x cubed. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, if I graph this, Graphing tangent means I'm going to have negative pi over 2 on the left and positive pi over 2 on the right. The pattern is going to be asymptote and you know how we had max level min with secant and cosecant and sine and cosine? X cubed is an increasing function, constantly increasing, so you can't have a max, a level, and a min. But you can have a low, middle, and a high. So they mean the same thing, they're found exactly the same way, they just have a different name. So you are going to have your low, your middle, and your high. And it's going to look like that. There's your x cubed graph, which is going to be your tangent graph. Do we understand tangent? Okay, then over here, I'm going to be graphing cotangent. Cotangent is going to start at 0 and end at pi. Again, starting point and ending points are going to be asymptotes. Okay? Now, with that being said, in the middle, I'm going to have 0, and then I'm going to have my high, not there. My high is going to be on the left side this time, and my low is going to be on the right side. And then you have this function right here. Okay? So that is going to be your cotangent graph. Now, I'm going to start and use an example from your homework as a tangent problem. Does that sound like a good idea? So let's go ahead and start your homework tonight. Your homework is 4-6, worksheet 1. There are 8 problems. I am going to begin with problem number 7, I think. So tonight's homework is 4-6, worksheet 1. And I'm going to begin with problem number 7. And we're going to graph a tangent graph. Are we ready? Okay, here we go. So, the very first thing your brain should know is that I'm graphing tangent. Okay? What does tangent look like again? An x cubed graph, right? So if it looks like an x cubed graph, what your brain needs to understand is if my amplitude is negative, that means it looks like a cotangent graph. Okay? So the pattern would change. Instead of low, middle, high, it's going to be high, middle, low. Okay? So very first thing we're going to do is we're going to find our amplitude, just like we did before. Amplitude is the absolute value of a half, which is just a half. Then that is going to impact my pattern. My pattern, it is not negative, which means I do not flip my high and my low. I'm going to keep it exactly the way it is. So that's going to be an asymptote, a low, a middle, a high, and then an asymptote. Yes? A low, middle, high. Next, our period. Now, our period does change compared to our sine and cosine graphs. Now it's pi divided by the absolute value of b. So I'm going to take pi and I'm going to divide it by, what is b in this problem? B is what is attached to the x by multiplication, so that's going to be pi over 4. So when you divide by a fraction, you are actually multiplying by its reciprocal. So the pi's cancel out, and your period is going to be 4. Yes? So now that I found my period, I still have to do my 4 quadrants, so I'm going to find my interval. My interval is going to be my period divided by 4. So 4 divided by 4 is 1, and that is my interval. Yes? We good? Okay, just like we did with the sine and cosine graphs, we then found our level. What does level represent in this problem? What would level represent in this problem? Level would be your middle point. Level would be your middle point, and that's going to be 0 plus or minus c. What is c in this problem? Do I have a c? I do not have a c, so therefore it's just 0 as my middle value. So then I found my middle, so now I need to go and find my high. High is found by taking your middle value and adding your amplitude to it. So that's going to be my middle value 0, and my amplitude is 1/2 to give me 1/2 as my high value. Yes? Now, to find my low, I'm going to take my middle value, and I'm going to subtract my amplitude. So that's going to be 0 minus 1/2, which gives me negative 1/2 as my low. Yes? Okay, so nothing is new here. So far, I just changed the words max, level, min to middle, low, and high. Yes? Okay, so now, the next thing we did whenever we did sine and cosine was we looked at the horizontal phase shift. So what we did is we went ahead and we set it equal to 0 and we set it equal to 2 pi. However, the period for tangent is going to be pi units, but it starts at negative pi over 2 and ends at positive pi over 2, which means my starting point is going to be the junk inside the parentheses, set equal to negative pi over 2, and then the ending point is the junk inside the parentheses, set equal to positive pi over 2. Do we all see this, yes or no? Because tangent starts at negative pi over 2 and ends at positive pi over 2. If this would be a cotangent graph, I would say set it equal to 0 and make it end at pi. Do we all understand what I just said? Okay. Now, with that being said, I need to get rid of the fractions, so I'm going to multiply everything by 4. So the 4's cancel out, that gives me a pi x. The 4's cancel out, that gives me a pi. 4 divided by 2 gives me a negative 2 pi. Now I need to solve for x. I'm going to subtract pi. So pi x is equal to negative 3 pi. I'm going to divide by pi to give me negative 3. So I'm starting this graph at the numerical number negative 3. Then I'm going to solve this by multiplying everything by 4. So that's pi x plus pi is equal to 2 pi. Subtract the pi. Pi x is equal to pi. Divide by x, or divide by pi, I mean, and that gives you x is equal to 1. So I'm starting at negative 3, and I'm ending at positive 1. How do I know that this is correct? What could I do to check that this is correct? Well, to check it, my period better be equal to the starting point minus the ending point. Yes? So that means this is going to be negative 3 minus 1, which is negative 4, and the absolute value of negative 4 is positive 4. Now, I know that I'm right because my period is 4. So I know I did it correctly. Do we all understand that, yes or no? Okay, so now we have to graph this. We have to make an XY table. So if we're making an XY table, I'm going to have x here, and I am starting where? I'm starting at negative 3. My interval that I'm adding is going to be what? 1. So negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2, plus 1 is negative 1, plus 1 is 0, plus 1 is 1. Does everybody see that, yes or no? Now, tangent is not fun to do calculations at. Okay? It's not difficult, but it's not as easily done. So 1/2 times the tangent of pi over x over 4 plus pi over 4. Then I'm going to have my pattern, and then I'm going to have my y values. What do we know our pattern is supposed to be? Well, we wrote our pattern down here, and we said it was supposed to be asymptote, low, middle, high, asymptote. So that's what we're going to write here. Asymptote, low, middle, high, asymptote. So our y values, we are literally going to put asymptote here and asymptote here. And what did we say our low value was? Negative 1/2. Our middle was 0, and our high was positive 1/2. So how do I graph that? Well, the way I graph that, -1, -2, -3, +1. Do you see that I have those there? Here's -1/2 and here's +1/2. Yes? So I'm going to put an asymptote here and an asymptote here. At -2, I'm at -1/2. At -1, I'm at 0. And at +1, or at 0, I'm at +1/2. And connect those dots as a curve or parabola going up and a parabola going down. There's your graph. I am not going to make you do anything in here right now. I'm going to make you graph it to check that what you did was correct. Okay? So, I'm showing you right now how to graph these on your graphing calculator so that you know that what you did was correct. So let me show you that now. Pulling up your graphing calculator. I'm going to go to a graphs page. I always need to make sure that I'm in radian mode. So how do you check that you're in radian mode? You can go to your document settings, or you can just go ahead and land on the battery, and that puts you in radian mode. And you're going to type in your function exactly the way you see it. So that is going to be 1 divided by 2 times the tangent of pi divided by 4 times x plus pi divided by 4. And I'm going to hit enter. That gives me all of the tangents across the entire real number axis. I didn't graph all of them, did I? I graphed a very specific region. So we're going to hit menu, and we're going to do window settings, and we're going to go from -3 to +1, and we go by 1 unit. And hit OK. Do you see it? Is that what it should look like on your paper? And it does. Now, you can also ask them to give you the values to make sure that you're right. So menu, trace, graph trace. At -2, what does it give me? -1/2. At -1, it gives me 0. At 0, it gives me 0.5. Or you can hit Control-T, and you can get them all. And you can arrow back, and you can see that those values are right there as well. So, should anybody miss any points on the test over this? No. You should always get the right answer, because you should be able to say, when in doubt, graph it out. Any questions over this? Great.